She was still strapped to a seat when she fell. 2 miles above the Amazon rainforest, LANSA Flight 508 had just broken apart in a lightning storm. No warning, no time. One moment, Juliane Koepcke was sitting beside her mother on a Christmas Eve flight. The next, she was in freefall, still buckled into a row of seats, spinning through open sky, the jungle canopy rising toward her at terminal velocity. She was 17 years old. She was completely alone, and somehow, impossibly, she was about to survive the fall. What came after was going to be much harder. Juliane Koepcke grew up in the Amazon. Her parents were both German biologists who had built a research station deep in the Peruvian jungle, a place called Panguana, so remote that the nearest town was days away by river. Juliane had spent her childhood surrounded by jungle, learning its sounds, its rhythms, its dangers. She knew which plants were safe and which weren't. She knew how rivers moved. She knew that in the jungle, the river was always the way out. On December 24th, 1971, Juliane and her mother Maria boarded LANSA Flight 508 in Lima. They were heading to Panguana to spend Christmas with Juliane's father. The flight was full, 86 passengers and 6 crew. A Christmas Eve flight on a Peruvian domestic airline cutting across the Andes and into the Amazon basin. The weather was bad. Experienced travelers knew LANSA had a poor safety record. This was the airline's third fatal crash in 4 years. But it was Christmas Eve, and the tickets were booked, and the alternative was staying in Lima alone for the holiday. The plane entered a storm system over the jungle at around 12,000 feet. Lightning hit the right fuel tank. The wing caught fire. Within seconds, the structural integrity of the aircraft failed, and Flight 508 broke apart in midair. Juliane remembered the roar, then the silence, then the green of the jungle far below rushing toward her. She was still in her seat, still alive, still falling. She hit the jungle canopy at reduced speed, the dense layers of trees slowing her descent in a way that open sky never could have. She lost consciousness on impact. She woke up on the jungle floor, alone. It was the morning of December 25th, Christmas Day. She had been unconscious for approximately 24 hours. She took stock. A broken collarbone, painful but manageable. A deep gash on her right arm, already showing the first signs of infection. One eye swollen almost shut. One sandal. The dress she had been wearing on the plane? No food except a small bag of sweets she found still clutched in her hand. No compass, no map, no radio. She called out for her mother, for other survivors. The jungle answered with bird calls, an insect noise, and nothing else. She remembered something her father had told her years ago at Panguana, a piece of survival knowledge so simple it would save her life. If you're ever lost in the jungle, find a stream. Follow it downstream. Streams become creeks. Creeks become rivers. Rivers lead to people. She found a small stream within hours. She got in and started walking. The Amazon jungle is not a place that forgives weakness. Heat and humidity so thick that breathing feels like work. Vegetation so dense that moving 10 meters off a path can disorient you completely. Insects in quantities that defy description. And the river, which was salvation, was also full of caiman, piranha, and parasites that could kill a person as effectively as anything else in the forest. Juliane walked in the water, partly because it was easier than fighting through vegetation, partly because the water was cooler, partly because her father had told her to, and her father knew this jungle better than anyone. She ate her sweets one at a time, rationing them with the discipline of someone who knew exactly how long she might be out here. She slept on sandbanks at the river's edge. She moved during daylight and stopped at dark. On the third day, she found the first crash debris, seat cushions floating in the water, a Christmas cake still in its packaging, 3 passengers still strapped to their seats, dead, half submerged, unrecognizable from the impact. She looked for her mother. She didn't find her. The gash on her arm was getting worse. She could see movement beneath the skin. Fly larvae had laid eggs in the wound during the first night, and the maggots were now living inside her. She remembered another piece of her father's knowledge. Pour petrol into the wound to force them out. She had no petrol. She kept walking. By day 7, Juliane was barely recognizable as the girl who had fallen from the sky, 20 pounds lighter, skin burnt and bitten raw, the wound on her arm now visibly writhing with dozens of maggots she had no way to remove. Her broken collarbone grinding with every movement. She had begun to hallucinate. The river bent in ways that didn't make sense. She heard voices that weren't there. She saw her mother standing on the bank ahead of her and walked toward her and found nothing. She told herself the things her father had told her. The river leads to people. Keep moving. One step is progress. She said them out loud when the silence got too heavy. She said them to the jungle because there was nobody else to say them to. On day 8, it rained for 12 hours straight. She sheltered under a fallen tree and counted the sounds of the jungle to keep herself from thinking about how far she still had to go and how far she had already come, and whether those two things would ever meet somewhere ahead of her on this river. On day 9, she found the boat. It was a small wooden motorboat pulled up on the riverbank, the kind used by jungle loggers and hunters, tied to a tree, a shelter nearby, nobody there. She searched the shelter and found what she had been looking for since the crash. Petrol. She poured it into her wound, the pain extraordinary, the relief of watching the maggots emerge, one by one, almost worth it. She counted. 37 maggots. She pulled each one out and kept going until the wound was clean. She found food in the shelter. She ate. She slept, properly, for the first time in 9 days, inside 4 walls with a roof over her head. The next morning, 3 men arrived at the shelter. Jungle workers returning from a logging camp upstream. They stopped when they saw her. A teenage girl, alone, covered in wounds, sitting calmly by their boat as if she had been waiting for them. They took her downstream by boat to a small jungle settlement. A local pilot flew her to the nearest hospital. She arrived 11 days after walking away from the wreckage of Flight 508. Of the 93 people aboard that flight, Juliane Koepcke was the only survivor. The search teams found the crash site 2 weeks later. They found her mother, Maria. She had survived the fall, but died in the jungle, too injured to move, within days of the crash. She had been close to her daughter the entire time. Juliane never knew. The investigators found something else, evidence that several other passengers had also survived the initial crash and fall. They had died in the jungle in the days that followed, from injuries, exposure, or simply not knowing which way to walk. Juliane survived because she had grown up in this exact environment, because her father had taught her the one rule that mattered: follow the river, because 17 years of living at Panguana had given her knowledge that no other passenger on that flight possessed. She went back to the jungle, completed her biology degree, got her doctorate, became a scientist like her parents. She returned to Panguana and continued the research her mother never finished. She still lives and works there today, in the same jungle that tried to kill her, on the same river that led her out. She was asked once in an interview whether she was afraid of flying after what happened. She said no. The jungle had never frightened her. It was what she knew. 93 people boarded LANSA, Flight 508 on Christmas Eve 1971. One walked out of the Amazon 11 days later. Not because she was the strongest or the luckiest, because she knew one thing nobody else on that plane knew: which way the river ran. If you enjoy survival stories that feel impossible but could be real, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.